Former Democratic Congressman and now U.S. Senate candidate Colin Allred of Dallas. Thank you so much, and welcome back to Eye on Politics.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jack.
You bet. So you have announced more endorsements from Democrats across the state. Why is this important, and what does it say about your campaign?
Well, listen, I'm honored to have the support of folks who I think know that I'm the strongest candidate to run in and win the general election. And I think this election, is too important, and there's too much at stake. And I think the folks who are supporting me recognize that we have to make sure that we build a strong ticket, that we have a strong candidate, and also one who's speaking to the issues of the moment. And I think right now, what folks are going through, as I see it, is the same thing that I went through growing up, which is an affordability crisis, one where they're working harder and harder for less. They think that nobody's on their side. I am. I see them. I hear them, and I want to be a senator for them.
And as you know, James Tallarico, the state representative from Austin, who's also running in the Democratic primary, released a list of endorsements. So for Democratic voters, is this just a wash?
Well, listen, I know this is part of it, of course, and there's going to be back and forth. But I think what we have to be focused on, is the general election and who can make sure that you have a record of winning tough elections. I beat, as you know, Jack, Pete Sessions in a really tough race here in North Texas and had a tough re-election, overperformed in the last election, have shown that we can do that. And I think that's what ultimately folks are looking for, in addition to, what are they facing right now? And what are the issues that we have right now? And I feel not only incredibly strongly about this because it's my personal story, but also that this is the way that we need to recenter our party around working folks who are trying their hardest to take care of their kids, working two or three jobs, feeling like it's harder and harder for them. They're having to tread water and wondering if anybody in Washington cares. And I certainly do care. And I want to not only show that in this campaign, but then hopefully show that through policy that I put forward to make sure we can turn into law.
And before I ask you about the general election, obviously you have to win the primary. What do you think the key is going to be to get more votes from Democratic primary voters here in Texas so that you win the nomination?
Yeah, and for me, I'm always focused on the general election. I think you know that about me, Jack. I'm focused on that because I think it's also what most primary voters are interested in, which is who can we actually trust is been battle tested, knows what they're fighting for, and is also running a campaign showing what they're fighting for. And for me, I've been going all around the state, working on work sites, at construction sites, and restaurants, going to high school football games, everywhere I can to speak directly to working folks, where they are, to make sure that I'm not just asking them to come to me, but that I'm going to them. And that's been my favorite part of this campaign. I think it's also what we need to be doing as a party. And then I'm going to take those voices with me into the Senate and make sure we pass laws that will actually lower their costs, create opportunity, and give folks a chance to get ahead.
I've got to ask you what's been circulating in the headlines. A lot of Democrats are talking about it here in Texas, and that is Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett says that she's considering getting into the Democratic race for U.S. Senate. And there have been hypothetical polls that show she is ahead. And so I'm wondering what do you think of that?
Well, listen, I've got a lot of respect for Jasmine. She's a friend, and she's certainly a fighter for her constituents, and I certainly appreciate that as somebody who's from Dallas. But as I said, my focus is on who I think the real opponents are here, which is not other Democrats. It's someone like John Cornyn, who's been in Washington for 2 decades doing nothing for working Texans. Someone like Ken Paxton, who is basically historically corrupt, and who's shown that he cannot represent us. I think we have folks running on the other side who are only interested in trying to pursue the support of one person, and that's Donald Trump. I'm trying to pursue the support of 30 million Texans, make sure they know that I'm here for them. I'll do that certainly in the primary, but also in the general election, regardless of who gets into the race.
And well, I was just going to ask you a follow-up on that. As far as Congresswoman Crockett, does that, if she were to do this, and still, I know she has been sending out polls, et cetera, or people on her behalf are sending out polls, but if she were to get in, would that present a problem for your campaign?
Well, listen, I think everything is always a challenge or an opportunity. And I see everything, in campaigns like this as you just have to approach it as an opportunity. Yes, it's something we'd have to deal with, but it would be an opportunity for us to continue to drive home the message, that I've been working on and trying to make sure that we, get folks to understand, which is that, I think that what working people are going through, in this state is that they're working harder and harder and they feel like they can't, you know, help their family get ahead. And so to me, that's the most important thing that I want to stay focused on, regardless of who gets into the race. As I think I've always had, multiple candidate primaries in the past. I've always ended up, being successful, but I've done that by being focused on what, not only being the best version of myself, but being focused on what I think folks out there are actually hoping that their candidates are thinking about. And so I don't ever worry about anybody or anything. What I worry about is the voters and what is going on in their lives, and try and make sure that I'm speaking to that I'm understanding that, and that I'm putting forward plans to address that.
And what do you think is the message? What part of your message do you think is resonating most with Democrats and the people that you have met, the people you've spoken before,
Yeah, I mean,
various places across the state?
yeah, I think they know me, and I think they know my story now, and I think they know that, what I've been through in terms of, how I grew up, being raised by a single mother here in Dallas, who was a public school teacher, struggling, but that I've worked incredibly hard to pay for my way through college, into law school, in the NFL, but I've used that to then try to turn around and help other folks and try to lift them up, both as a civil rights lawyer, serving in the Obama administration, serving in Congress, and that I've done it with integrity. And I've done it in a way that shows that you don't have to be embarrassed by your elected officials. You can have somebody who never trades stocks and is not trying to get rich in office. You can have somebody who rejects corporate PAC money, even though, he's running in tough races where every dollar counts, and who then turns around and is trying to, make important changes like banning gerrymandering, and reforming what I think is a broken Congress that's lost a lot of trust and ceded way too much power to the executive. And so I think there's an understanding of that, and understanding that when I'm talking about, affordability and somebody being able to buy a home, for example, and how difficult that is, that I'm speaking to that from personal experience, because that was my mom's experience, and that it was only when I got in the NFL that I was able to help her buy her home. So I think there's an authenticity and also a relationship that's been built that is certainly resonating.
And are there any policy differences that you have with Tallarico, with other Democrats who are in this race?
Well, I'm sure there are. And, listen, Jack, I think you know that I'm always been more focused on actually getting things done than ideology. I'm not a very ideological person. I've never come at, things from that direction. I'll work with anybody to get my plans done. When it comes to, some of the issues that I think are most important, I think they can be bipartisan and that we can find ways to get buy-in to get that done. I also seen that that's also how we're going to get that turned into law. But there are some big fights that we have to have, and I have the experience of having had those fights. When we're talking about, what are the biggest challenges to our democracy right now, whether it's gerrymandering or attacks on the right to vote. I mean, I'm literally the voting rights lawyer in this campaign, right? So, I think that I certainly bring a wealth of experience to some of these issues. But I think as you know, and as I think many Texans know, I'm not somebody who's ever come at this from just the idea that, Democrats are going to have every right idea, and that it's only our way or the highway. I want to try and find a way to get things done so we actually pass these ideas into law instead of just talking about them, because that to me is when I get kind of frustrated.
You spoke a little bit about the Republicans in this race and winning the general election. And, it's still an uphill climb, as you know, for Democrats to win in a state like Texas. So, what do you think is going to be the key for you to do that if you win the nomination and are going up against either Senator Cornyn or AG Paxton or Congressman Wesley Hunt?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, so many Texans out there who, are working class folks who we have to make sure that we're speaking to. And I think by and large, in recent elections, I think that neither party has done a good enough job of doing that. And when I, am working at a construction site or at a high school football game and I'm talking to people, I'm hearing a lot of just distrust in general. I think of politics or the idea that anything can really change. And that I think is what we have to take on, head on. And I want to make sure that we're doing that person to person and, talking to people where they are. I think I have an authenticity and an ability to go into any room in our state, whether that's in Brownsville, where my family's from, or whether it's at Prairie View A&M, historically black college, where I was last weekend, and talk to anybody in any of those rooms about what I can do to help them get ahead, and also what my experience has been and why it's going to allow me to go to the Senate and be a fighter for them. And that's what I think we have to do, both in terms of the election, but I think it's also we have to do in terms of restoring faith in what I think folks have lost faith in a broken system that's been rigged against them. I want to unrig it and make sure that people actually feel like they have a voice. And as much as possible, I want to take on this system that I think has really been broken, holding folks back.
Colin Allred, thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Jack.
We appreciate it.